Hi everybody, this is Carolyn Durley. This is the screencast for the session, A Flipped Classroom for Every Learner. And so let's get started. The first way I like to start my screencast is with the key ideas. So the key ideas of this screencast and this session are when you begin to build your flipped classroom, begin with the end in mind, begin with the vision of the classroom that you want to build. And so this is no different than building a unit, a lesson, or a game plan for anything in life. I would start small, as in you can't change everything the first year or the first semester. So start with a couple of key things that you're trying to build and then build on those. I spent a lot of time organizing in the summer to let go, as in I wanted to give students all the materials I could at the start and all the patterns and habits that they could then take more control of their own learning. The last and probably most frustrating and maybe disappointing to you is that there is no recipe for a flipped classroom. Unfortunately, you are going to have to make your recipe. There are some key ingredients, of course, but how you combine them and how you mix them up and how you flavor them is really going to be up to you. So some vocabulary that I use when referring to the flipped classroom and the running of my flipped classroom. When I started my big idea, that was my big end goal. I wanted a self-sustaining community. I wanted a community of learners that could work together without me, so that if I didn't show up, that their learning would still carry on. I also this year became much more aware of what does learning look like? What does it feel like? What is it like? And it's two things that I really noticed. It's very messy. And one, that for me as a teacher, that I needed to get my teacher self out of the way and I had to become the learner. So instead of being the marker in chief, I had to become the learner in chief, and I spent a lot of time trying to model my learning in front of kids. Flex time is time that kids have to work on their own. Learning packets are the packets that I give students for each unit that they then work through. Hot seat is a word that we use to describe when we talk to kids one-on-one. We have an interview with them before a test or before an assessment, and they present to us their evidence for their learning in that unit to demonstrate that they are ready for that assessment. Learning journals are something that we use this year for students to connect with thinking about their learning, to reflect on. A big part of being a learner is time to reflect, time to decide what went well, and to look ahead and make things better. So when I started with the vision, it is really like starting all over. You kind of strip everything bare out of your room and you're going to start over. So that's a big job. If you've ever renovated your kitchen, right, starting from scratch all over again, or if you've renovated a bathroom or any room for that matter, it is a big task. It is also scary because although I had many dreams and ideas about the classroom that I wanted, it is when you're used to doing things, you've gotten really used to them, you have some ingrained habits, to change those is quite frightening. Also, very uncertain. You don't know where you're going, so it's kind of like walking in the dark. You bump into things. You're going to have to be ready for some mistakes. And the biggest thing I found was that for me, after being a teacher for quite a while, that I was used to having my classroom run incredibly smoothly. I had a high level of perfection that I liked, and I really was used to that. So to go from being like that to being not perfect, it hurt, and I felt uncomfortable. So the first semester especially was really uncomfortable. So my image for you would be, right, you're going in for a reno if you're going to start a flipped classroom, if you're going to build one from the ground up. So I spent a lot of time organizing, and I tried to imagine what skills that I really wanted to focus on. And for me, it was that students could connect to their own learning without me, so they could become independent. And the other one was that they could reflect on their learning, so they would have time for metacognition. So those really were the two things I focused on. I would say the problem you're going to have is that there's going to be resistance, that although students do like learning, they are better at playing school. So they know all the rules for playing school. They do not know all the rules for learning. So you have to teach them, and you have to be ready for them to be frustrated. The other thing that you need to be ready for is that perhaps when you get stressed or tired or run down or sick, that you might slip backwards. And I think with any program of change, exercise, diet, there'll always be backwards slides, and that's okay. The first semester I was really hard on myself. I felt that if I made any mistakes, if I went backwards, then that was a complete failure. So I'd say when you're organizing, when you start, imagine what are the large rocks, what do you most value, what do you want to put in, and put those into your design of your classroom first, and then the small pebbles and the sand and the water, they can fit in where and if later on. So that's my image for you for that one. The mainstays of my classroom, and those are the ones that we're going to look at in a second, the packet. So I call them learning packets. Each unit had a learning packet. We have a sample. Flex time is the time that students have to work on their own. Hot seat is the interview before an assessment. Learning journals were a mainstay, and I found students really liked these. They enjoyed them. They were stress-free. They were not for marks. They were not for assessment. They were simply for reflection. And I got a lot of useful information, and students, I think, got something useful out of it. I also tried to move from cookbook labs to inquiry-based labs. So not so many small steps, more big questions, and students had to figure it out. Again, this is a steep learning curve working like this. I also tried to provide at the beginning of the semester a library of all the resources that students would need to access their learning. And at first they found this very overwhelming, and that was a skill in itself, how to organize, how to decide what you need to do your learning. Everybody needs something else, and so that takes time too. So a sample class, and every class we would begin with a review of last day, and we might do it in an organized fashion. So reciprocal questioning, summarizing, whiteboarding. You might do it in a group. We might have an open class discussion, but usually 10 to 15 minutes, depending on the topic. We would, the beginning of class would begin with review of last day or the day before, and students talking about the screencast. And I found this, students loved this. They absolutely love reviewing what they watched, and there was a much higher level of accountability because they came to class with their own questions. Still did traditional quiz every day, although it was not for marks, it was for the check-up. So not for the diagnosis, but the check-up that everything was going well. First semester, I did not do any stand and deliver. I kind of felt like that was cheating. But I found students found that quite threatening. So second semester, I started with a summary, and I usually was running, I would review perhaps 2 days behind topics. So I was always running a little bit behind what they were doing, and I would go over and summarize. In short, I used Prezi, but I weaned them off of this second semester, and I found that much better. Students were much happier with me when they saw that I was able to stand and deliver. I still was their teacher. I still knew the subject matter. I hadn't abandoned them. And at the same time as reducing my my stand and deliver, I increased their flex time. And so I weaned them off of me and I weaned them onto themselves. So I started with 10 minutes at the beginning. I moved up to where in some days we could spend the whole class and they would work independently, making choices about how to best use their time. And so I found that much better than what I had tried first semester. I tried to have a lab or a challenge, question, problem type thing each day. Always time to reflect, whether it's in your journal or talking face to face with somebody or a hot seat, but sometime every day to reflect, and an activity of some kind. So whiteboarding, playing a game, some kind of group activity. Challenges with it. Well, the big one was the control. I had controlled time, activity. Everybody had to do the same thing at the same time under my control. So I definitely was the remote control, and I had to put that remote control down and let students make some choices for themselves. This is hard. Students don't always make the best choices for themselves. Sometimes they waste time, and this was a learning experience for me. It's hard to watch students make bad choices. However, what I found that students, if they had supported failure, so if they had a bad, right, they wasted some classes, they got behind, that what it did is it motivated them in most cases, not all of course, to get back on track. And they became better at self-regulation after they had this, what I call supported failure at the beginning, rather than me controlling them the entire time, which is what I did in the past. And I thought this was useful, although it was hard. My question that I spend a lot of time questioning, thinking about, right, how much time wasted is too much? If I let students get too far behind, is it going to become disastrous? And usually I intervened when I thought that it became the at-risk area, at risk of failure. However, I did get some interesting feedback from students that they really didn't like that and they didn't really feel they needed that. I still felt that I wanted to intervene. However, I've gotten better, and I think in the long run, I think students figure out their time management if given the opportunity. The last challenge that I really faced was that I was used to flavoring. The flavor in the classroom was always me. It wasn't student, it was me and my personality, me and my energy. And I really missed this at first, and I think students missed this too because they knew who I was and they wanted me, the personality me. Again, I still gave them some of my flavor and my energy, but again, I found that over time, I kind of weaned them off of that flavor, that spice, and slowly, and I think I would next year spend more time, the flavors of the classroom came to the surface and the energy of the room began to have its own energy that was self-sustaining without me. And although this was sad and definitely a loss for me as my role as a teacher, it was also a celebration to see that, oh, look at that. The students can create a classroom that is truly their own. So next year, things that I am looking to grow on, I'd like to spend more time at the beginning of the year. And this year I felt rushed. I felt a bit panicked. I was trying to do a lot of new stuff, but I realized that in the end, the more time you spend at the beginning, right, is going to pay off in the long run. More time building peer-to-peer interactions and more collaboration amongst peers. So I would really like to emphasize that. The other thing I'd really like to work on is giving students more choice and finding what, in terms of within the topics that we study, the topics of biology and the human body, for them to choose something and something that is more going deeper, digging deeper into a specific topic. So I would ask you at the end of this little screencast, can you describe what your dream classroom would look like? Can you describe what your own learning, before we start talking about what learning looks like for our students, we should know what learning looks like for ourselves, and what would be the first changes that you might want to make for your classroom. Hope that helped.